Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perry Goldstein. What a game to get to talk about here. Monday Night Football, obviously Packers hosting the Saints, a playoff clinching spot on the line. And they pitched a shutout, 34-0. Monday Night Football, obviously against a banged up Saints team. We're going to talk about it, but clinching their spot in the playoffs in style. We don't know, obviously, where they're going to shake out, but we do know that they're going to be in the postseason. So this is what, 6 of 7 or 5 of 6 for Matt LaFleur to make it into the postseason. So just a really impressive performance all around. And he had said during the game that he wanted to play complementary football. He wanted to be complete in all three phases. And Packers got really damn close to it, if it wasn't perfect going into Monday night. So Perry, initial takeaways from this one, because it was a fun one.
Yeah. They went into this 99% going to make the playoffs. They did it themselves. They got the win. They're in. Now it's a matter of what seed they are. You mentioned it, first shutout of the season. So that was an interesting stat that I enjoyed hearing. First shutout of the season. Major takeaways. Definitely a harder one to gauge, considering I think how lopsided the teams are. The Packers are clearly the better team on paper and in execution in this one. Saints super banged up, obviously with their backup quarterback and missing pretty much all of their stars on offense. But at the same time, you can only play the opponent in front of you. And we went into this saying, well, this should be a dominant performance if you are clearly the better team, and that's exactly what it was. Packers were just like by far and away the better team in all three phases. They the run game looks even more, it just continues to look dominant no matter who is back there. Josh Jacobs got to get some rest and give the other two backs some time. It gives Jordan Love ease to play kind of free and not have to rely on his arm. This defense was able to tee off, and a shutout with 4 starters missing is also no small feat. So I like the way this team is headed, and they're trending very much in the right direction, especially going into next weekend against probably their last and final big game before the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we talked about too, is wanting to build off of the momentum and get into the playoffs, because the path to the playoffs is pretty straightforward for the Packers, right? They were going to finish the season against the Saints, who were banged up. They see the Bears, at Lambeau to end the season, but they still had to play the Vikings. We know the Vikings and Lions are playing. So at this point, it's kind of like a pick your poison, right? Who you're rooting for down the stretch. If you want the Vikings to get the 1 seed, the Lions to get the 1 seed, if you want the stadium to collapse and the Eagles to get the 1 seed, whatever your rooting interest is, it is hard to gauge, right? Because this is a Packers team that is light years better than the Saints team, especially with all of the injuries to that Saints team. We wanted to see a dominant performance. We saw that, 34 points is not nothing against any NFL defense. Holding a team of NFL players to 0 points is not nothing either. But it didn't happen against a playoff team. So certainly, a lot to be excited about and a lot to be optimistic about, because I think the team is starting to fire on all cylinders when you want them to be firing on all cylinders. But again, hard to truly gauge. So I think it'll be interesting to see when they get up against a team that could potentially be the number 1 seed in the NFC, where things stack up on Sunday in a game that the NFL is also interested in, because it got flexed to a primetime spot at 3:25.
Yeah, as it should be, as it should.
Right.
And I think also, maybe you just want to look at the Saints game in more of a, not in a vacuum, but in like what the Packers have been doing since they came out of the bye. And what they have been doing is they've scored the second most to your point, right? 34 points is not nothing. And they've been scoring high numbers. This offense has really started to click over the last few weeks, and they have the second most points scored in the NFL at the moment, and they've allowed the second fewest points in the NFL. So they have a NFL best plus 90 point differential over the last 6 weeks. So if you look again at like getting hot at the right time and putting things together at the right time, really regardless of opponent, those are not stats to just poo-poo. Again, regardless, like I said, of who you're playing. In just 1 week, but like extrapolated over the course of the last like month and a half.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about it with Mina Kimes when she was on here a couple weeks ago. But yeah, there's certainly a lot to still like. You know, those two Lions games, the Packers got really close. Like they're still, even if their couple of losses have come against the other NFC playoff contenders, there's a lot to like in their performance, and they really should be up there as one of the
Mhm.
premier teams, one of the dominant teams in the NFC. So really good matchup coming up, of course, on Sunday against the Vikings, but
Yeah.
still, a really nice way to go into the holiday season for the Packers, of course. And not to be um overshadowed by the fact that the defense was missing pieces here as well, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, they were without Jair Alexander, who I think gets closer and closer. Maybe he'll be ready for Sunday. We'll see. Evan Williams was kind of a surprise, unable to play, but Javon Bullard we knew would be week to week, and Quay Walker was week to week. So getting to see what you have in guys like Edgerrin Cooper getting more playing time, Zane Anderson of all people, he does exist as a starting safety. His
Yeah.
first career start and first career pick was really fun to just see kind of the depth that the Packers have. And yes, again, it was against a Saints offense that was really banged up, but nice to know that the depth exists. Like Katan Oladapo got to play a couple of snaps on defense at the very end of the game. Like players you just haven't seen all season got to be out there
Yes.
for a little bit. So
Yeah.
always good experience going into the postseason.
100%. And to your point, like you just never know who you're going to need in what games. And so those snaps could like potentially prove to be invaluable. Not that you hope that your starters are not playing in 3 to 4 weeks. But again, if that's what this defense looks like, if need be, if that next man up mentality means they're playing at a high level, then fantastic. I was also looking at some stats for the Packers defense through the whole season, not just since the bye, but the whole season, because I think they've been pretty up and down, or at least we've felt like maybe they've been up and down. Obviously, the Packers have a winning record, and for the most part, they've looked really good. But I think you look at these and you're like, oh, the Packers have a top 10 defense right now. Their points per game, they're sixth. Rushing yards per game, allowing rushing yards per game, seventh. So one of the, we've been saying, they've been great stopping the run. They have been great stopping the run. Passing yards per game, eighth, even without Jair Alexander. I know this is a personal concern of mine that coverage has not been great, but it's been fine. And I think takeaways, they're tied for third. That one should be pretty obvious. I mean, they had 2 more last night against the Saints. And then sacks percentage, they're actually 6th in the league in sacks percentage. So again, concerns about the pass rush, they're legitimate. And I think pass rush and sacks are certainly situational as well. We've talked a ton about, you get your sack on second down and then they convert a third down. Does the sack even really matter? But they are generating the pass rush more and more. You saw it again. They were able to tee off a ton against a pretty bad Saints offensive line and poor Spencer Rattler, but you want to get those reps in, and they're 6th in the league in sack percentage.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was one of the things too that Jeff Hafley, he had said, like, it's not an overnight turnaround. You've got players that are transitioning, even though we talk about the base defense in the NFL really kind of being more nickel now, you've still got guys that were playing, standing up, rushing, now have their hands in the dirt. Like the transition from a 3-4 to a 4-3 isn't natural for everyone. We saw it with Preston Smith, right? Like he asked to be traded because he didn't fit the defensive front that Jeff Hafley was running. And, we knew that it was going to kind of take some time, but Kenny Clark has been really phenomenal the last couple weeks. Mr. December, continues. Rashawn Gary is like unblockable. He was just kind of dominating Penning all night on the edge. So just some really promising stuff because the Vikings do have a decent O-line, even though they've been beat up for a lot of the season, lost some starters. They do have key pieces. And again, in the playoffs, you see the very best of the best. So even if this game, kind of feels like a layup or a warm-up when you look at the caliber necessarily of the opponent, wins all count the same. And the reps are invaluable. And I think that's also, kudos to Matt LaFleur for getting the guys out once it was out of reach so that you didn't risk any of those unnecessary injuries because they got much bigger plans than just finishing this regular season.
100%. Devonte Wyatt also to me stood out. He's starting to stand out, I should say. Yeah, no, you make a great point. I like the term warm up, not layup. I think that's a lot kinder and also a better way of looking at what these games mean. They still matter. They still matter for the Packers. The way you play matters. And I think, we were talking pre-show. If we want to talk about the offense now, really quick, around like Matt LaFleur's kind of choices, and he felt a little bit more aggressive, quote unquote, in this game, going for it on fourth down situationally, but he still was kicking field goals. And the questions surrounding, is that the right move, especially in this game when you're up so much? Does it matter? Should have gone for it, et cetera, et cetera. And my thought process around it was, to your point, like the special teams and Brandon McManus also need those reps. To see Brandon McManus kick a 55-yarder in the cold, like hell yeah. But also I like that Matt LaFleur, yes, maybe he looked a little bit more aggressive in this game, but I do like that he plays his brand of football, regardless of opponent and regardless of like the situation at hand. Like I truly believe that being consistent is the way to go. He could have, to your point you were saying before the show, like he could have pulled a Dan Campbell and gone for it on every fourth down, and that would have been like perfectly acceptable in this game. This was always out of hand for the Saints, but that's not him. That's not the way he coaches, and I don't see him ever being, reckless to the point of going for a fourth down in their own territory, regardless of the score, regardless of whether it's plausible at all to have the Saints come back, even if they don't convert. That's not the way that he coaches, and it's not the way he plays. So I'm glad for his level of consistency.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's definitely something to be studied and something to be said about the Dan Campbell approach, but regardless of how you feel about your defense, and I think, we see that the Packers really do trust their defense. I would rather trust my defense with 90 yards of field than have to trust my defense and say, "Hey guys, we're sorry. Now you only have 30 yards. Tighten up here if you can." But I do think that is the Matt LaFleur way. And it paid off, right? They converted 100% of fourth downs. When they did go for it, they were 4 for 4 in the red zone. So again, everything that we had said the previous weeks where they were kind of struggling, coming out of the bye, their red zone percentage is one of the best in the NFL. And, a testament to Matt LaFleur. All three of his running backs got a rushing touchdown, which is just a ton of fun for those guys. Chris Brooks, the first, I believe, of his career. So really exciting. And something we did talk about a little bit pre-show that we didn't mention yet was just Jordan Love, right? Like he a couple errant throws tonight, or last night in the cold, sure, whatever, like not as crisp as we've seen him, but kind of funny to only have like an 88.7 QBR and just, he had a pretty flawless game. 16 completions, 182 yards, did everything that the team needed him to do, had a couple deep shots obviously, and it's like, well, just another day at the office. Like he can be this just average 185-yard kind of quarterback. I'm not saying that he's an average player, but you know what I mean? Like a very mediocre-ish looking day at the office on the stat sheet. And it's just everything that this offense needs because this offense is just so fine-tuned and humming the way that it needs to be.
Yeah. I think, to your point, like we spent a long time where this offense ran on the quarterback needing to be Superman. And now our quarterback can be Superman. Like he has that in his arsenal. He can put up a 4-touchdown, like 300-yard game easily if that's what's required and that's in the game plan. But this offense also can put up 34 relying on the run game. And I think that's what makes them so scary because they have a really, really strong dual threat on the ground and through the air. And they don't even need to whip out the Jordan Love, Superman arm card unless it really calls for it. They can say, we're going to hit you on the ground and see if you can stop us. And if you can somehow, look at who we got passing the ball and who we have passing the ball to. The Saints could not stop the run game at all. It was bad tackling. It was just, it was hard to watch, to be honest with you. The Josh Jacobs stiff arm of the Honey Badger, just and even when it's not, I think the reason why you feel so strongly about this run game is because when you take Josh Jacobs out of the equation, the run game still looks super dominant. So
Yeah.
it's not just the player, because it is the player, right? You have to give Josh his due, but it's also the run blocking on the offensive line, and it's the play calling, and it's everything around it to make it work. So I'm excited to see what they're able to do off this run game, because I do think, and I want your thoughts about this in this game in particular. We talked about Matt LaFleur like being very consistent in his choices and fourth down and things like that, but this was a game where he was able, I think, to put some new things on tape, like try out some new looks and put the ball in some of his receivers' hands in like rushing situations, and vice versa. The running backs got involved in the receiving game quite a bit. So I think Matt was able to do some more fun play calling things in this game, which is that was the perfect situation for.
Yeah. I think that he put like a lot of new wrinkles on tape that now opposing defenses are going to have to really analyze, because we talked about it with Dusty a couple seasons ago. The Matt LaFleur offense just really has so many different trees, right? There's so many different personnel packages and groupings where you can see a play trot out there, and maybe it's 12, maybe it's 21, whatever the personnel package is, and they can run like 10 different plays from that single look. And going into the postseason, it's kind of funny. I mean, I think there's the why are they doing this now and not in the postseason? But I think it complicates things in the postseason
Mhm.
when you've seen certain looks that now you have to account for and wonder if it's what you saw previously or if there's a new wrinkle coming out of that formation. And Matt LaFleur, continues to be one of the best coaches in the NFL. And I think, unfortunately, again, we're probably looking at a year where he doesn't win Coach of the Year because he's in such a contested division. And you're talking about teams that have played multiple quarterbacks throughout the season and whatever the picture is. But Matt LaFleur almost continues to feel underrated as a coach when he just continues to be one of the absolute best. So really enjoy his offense, obviously. And I think he's got an offense that really truly buys in.
Yeah.
Like we've seen it the last couple years, Jordan runs it the exact way that it should be run. He's got players that he can utilize to execute to perfection. And we talked about how tough it would be to see this offense without Aaron Jones. But boy, I think Josh Jacobs, his 14 touchdowns are like the most of any player in their first year with the Packers. Like just phenomenal. And
Mm.
again, I mean, 69 yards, right? Like it's not like he
Yeah.
came out there and lit it up for 200 yards, which he can do, but
Mhm.
just a really, really dominant execution.
Yeah. Over 100 if you include his receiving
Right.
yards. Which again, like they just get everybody involved in so many different ways. And that was something they talked about preseason when they signed Josh, was we're going to get him involved in the pass game. It was not something he did with the Raiders at all, and now it's something he does regularly. 4 catches for 38 yards. And we've talked a little bit about this over the last couple of weeks, and I really feel this way. He's really becoming like Jordan's, go to, dump off. There was that one, it felt like Jordan was going to get sacked and he
Mhm.
just kind of dumped it off, and Josh grabs it and goes for, I don't know, it was probably only like 3 or 4 or 5 yards, nothing crazy, but those kinds of things where you trust your guys. And I think he has multiple receivers who can do that too. But Josh, especially, just being able to do something in this offense that he was never able to do. Um, he's a very special back. It's been really fun to watch him.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're at the point of the show probably where we can give out game balls.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of them, right? You can
Mhm.
make the case for almost every player on the roster to get a game ball. So outside of the caveat here that maybe we'll give the whole team a game ball for a 34-point victory and a shutout, who gets your first game ball?
Well, my first game ball. Well, it was really fun to see Chris Brooks get his first NFL touchdown. But I think just the running back room probably
Mhm.
deserves a game ball. Like I said before, I mean, I said it before, but you can put anybody back there and they do such a fantastic job getting positive yardage, moving the chains. All three of them got touchdowns. They are scary. But if I had to choose a player, it would be Chris Brooks, because he had a great day also aside from his touchdown. Um, six carries, 23 yards in the tud.
Yeah, I like that one. I think that's deserved. Um, Mine maybe is not as obvious, probably could be, but Keyshawn Nixon, I think, just
Mhm.
continues to the broadcast was obsessed with him yesterday, and I thought that was so deserved. He had a sack, he forced the fumble, and he's just flying around, right? He's doing everything that possibly could be asked of him from Jeff Hafley. He's had to play in the slot, he's had to play in the boundary, he kind of rotates back and forth depending on need, if Jair's out or if the safeties are out. He's still a core special teamer. Like the dude is playing a ton of snaps, and you would think that he would be gassed and tired, but he continues to make plays. And he's also just such a locker room leader. Rich Bisaccia loves him, Matt LaFleur loves him. They were interviewing Xavier McKinney after the game about how
Yeah.
it feels to make the postseason, and Keyshawn Nixon's like, "Hey, welcome to the Packers. Like, this is what we do. It's not you don't have to fight your way to get here. Like, this is something that you can expect when you're in Green Bay." And I think that mentality, especially for the locker room, goes a really long way because we know Jair is the leader of the secondary, right? And you could argue that McKinney comes in as a vet and the big acquisition and can be that leader, but I think Nixon is kind of undervalued in he had some growing pains in the defense to start the season, but he has just been such a reliable force. And especially when he comes on a blitz, it's so much fun to watch.
My favorite. Yeah, he's such a great pick because I think we haven't the general public, and I agree with you. I thought the broadcast really gave him his flowers, so super deserved. Haven't talked enough about like how much he does for this team
Mhm.
and how versatile he's had to be with the injuries, and he just gets moved around and really does such a solid job no matter where he is playing. I do still do genuinely feel like he is going to break a return open soon. Do. If it happens in the playoffs, great. But it really does feel like that. And to your point about the locker room, he does bring such an energy.
Mhm.
Because you can lose a guy like Jair on the field, and that personality is a clear loss. Like Jair is just such a unique, and it you feel it when Jair is not out there. But I think Keyshawn fills that hole. And it's hard to you have to remind yourself like this was a guy that Goot picked up off a practice squad, um, undrafted, and came in here and now has just grown into this super large role. So Goot saw the potential there, and I think Keyshawn has surpassed like any of our, and I probably within the building's expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have another game ball that you'd like to give out?
Maybe not a game ball, but more like a shout out is that it was really nice to see Luke Musgrave back in the game. I know he didn't have a catch in this game, but he missed 10 games this season on IR, super hurt. Really, really good to see him back. I think they're probably like easing him in definitely on a snap count, but I'm excited to see what he can contribute down the stretch. And it was fun to see 88 and 85 back out there together.
Yeah, I think that Tucker Kraft is one of those candidates too that could always be deserving of a game
Yeah.
ball for the role he plays on offense, but really hoping that once Musgrave gets rolling, that the two of them will have some really dominant performances because I think as the league kind of figures out Tucker Kraft and who he is and what he can do, that's the perfect time for Musgrave to kind of explode into the postseason. I think my last one, we talked about it a little bit already. Edge Cooper could get one. Of
Yeah.
course, there's a lot of players that could get them, but St. Anderson, I feel like definitely deserves one. Called in for his first NFL start on defense, has a pick. Just Really fun story for him, obviously, to be a core special teamer, the ghost of the Packers locker room for a couple of years now. Then has to play like half the game last week and, comes in this week as an official starter and ends what arguably was probably the closest the Saints got to scoring in the entire game. Just picks that
Yep.
ball off right at the goal line and capitalizes and forces a turnover. So game balls for him as well. But any final thoughts on this one before we wrap it up? A really, really fun game and a really complete game by the Packers.
Yes. Very fun, very complete, very solid win. I think good momentum going into next week. Obviously, a short week by one day, and the Packers should walk into Minnesota feeling like they can beat the Vikings, because they can beat the Vikings.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect place to wrap it up here. We will be back later this week, of course, to talk about that Packers Vikings game. Big, big playoff implications in that one for the Packers, for the Vikings, for the entire NFC picture. So, really good game coming up here. If you celebrate the holidays, make sure that you enjoy the time with your family, your chosen family, whoever you'll be seeing, and enjoy a Packers win. Victory Tuesdays feel just as good as Victory Mondays, Victory Fridays, any victory of the week. You can find the podcast everywhere you find your favorite podcasts, on YouTube, on Spotify. Support the show if you love what we're doing at Pax What She Said, at PWSS Podcast. Kind of Perry at Perry_Goldstein, me at Maggie J. Loney. And we'll be back. Go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.